there was more than turkey being talked about this past weekend around the Thanksgiving tables in Hamilton. In fact, with an election just a little over a year away, people were rightfully asking, who's going to go for that appointment, that Ward 5 seat that council didn't want to do a by-election on, they'd rather appoint. Who's going to go out for that and maybe get on council? And more importantly, who's going to run this town next year? Who's going to be the mayor? I mean, so far, the incumbent, Fred Eisenberger, has signaled that he might go for it again. And Bob Bertina, the former mayor in between the Mayor Fred days, has also signaled that, hey, maybe that's in consideration. Can you imagine, Hamilton? I mean, it made me lose my appetite. The thought of having to go into the polling booth and either pick Bob or Fred, two recycled mayors that, in my estimation, don't have the right to go again for this. I mean, technically they have the right, but do they have the vision? Do they have the trust? Do they have what Hamilton deserves at this time in our history? Well, I'm happy to tell you here on the OShow, by all accounts, there are some other big names that are thinking about getting into the mayor's race. One of them is Keenan Loomis. He is the CEO of the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and I think distinguished himself in civic leadership by really helping to push through the LRT. You know, that project that Mayor Bertina was against and Mayor Fred couldn't really get done without help from the private sector? Yeah, that Keenan Loomis. He's seriously looking at it from all accounts. And David Christopherson, remember David? He was an MP for a long time. Well, David ran for mayor years and years ago and didn't win, but maybe, just maybe, he's considering coming back into public life. Those are some pretty big names. But I've also got some big names with me here on the show who are going to talk turkey about what's happening with the mayor's race and with all of those ward seats. Because this is a conversation we need to start now, Hamilton. We cannot let this wait until the rip drops in May, because then you might as well hand it to the incumbents if they choose to run again. I'm so excited to have joining me here on the program, the organizer extraordinaire, Sarah Jama. Sarah, welcome to the OShow.
So much for having me. Sorry, I had to unmute myself.
That's okay. I hope you never mute yourself again in many ways, Sarah. But let me also ask you, are you going to run for mayor? Because your voice is loud and your name was being circulated for quite a while.
I knew you were going to do that. I didn't think you were going to do this at the first question. You're fast. I thought about it. I'm not ruling it out, but I think my efforts are more useful toward running campaigns. I've been involved in the last 3 cycles. I'm pretty good at it. And what I would say is the work has already started to make sure that the next cycle of people look different and sound different. And so I think my efforts are better put there, but who knows? I'm not ruling it out.
Ooh, I love it. Another hot scoop here on the OShow. Okay. Mark Cripps is joining the conversation. Mark, it's great to have you here as both a former journalist, but also someone who's worked on political campaigns, worked in a minister's office. I got to ask you, Mark, when I put the tweet up about today's show, people wanted Mark to run for mayor. Any thoughts on that?
No, thanks. My wife would tell me. You know, I think it's time for new voices. I've had my time in politics and I enjoyed it, but I really would rather get behind somebody new, somebody who's got the energy. I'm 54. I'm ready to sort of enjoy the rest of my life out of.
Nice. Well, I won't make this about age in particular, because I think young or old people can be good at politics. But let me ask you, Mark, was I being too tough off the top of the show talking about the fact that I don't think the recycled mayors of Bob Bertina or Fred Eisenberger really should get another shot at the job? Am I being too tough on them?
Well, I think you're being fair, and I think you're speaking to what a lot of us think about both. You know, like nothing personal against either one of these, and I thank them for their political contributions and the contributions they continue to make. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think for Bob, it's all about ego and just teasing out and trying to get some attention. And for Fred, it's stubbornness. And I'm surprised he hasn't kind of signaled that it's time for someone else. He could actually be a really strong voice for a new candidate and pass the torch and be that kind of person to say, you know, Hamilton's on the precipice of some big, important shifts.
Sarah, you tell me, what do you think we need to see in the mayor's chair? What kind of experience, what kind of perspective, what is the city yearning for, and what does it deserve?
People in that seat who have a track record. And don't get me wrong, the mayoral seat is not the most important seat. A lot of it is ceremonial, right? I'm way more interested in getting other people elected in other seats because strategically it's a better expenditure of all of our time. But the person in that seat needs to understand the weight and the ceremonial weight that comes with being mayor. Yeah, you may only have one vote, but where you stand like shapes the political leadership around the table. So we need people willing to be controversial, willing to take a stand. We talked a little bit about the LRT in the beginning, but look at the impact that the LRT would have on houseless people who are displaced. I've met people living in encampments. We can't just look at issues one-dimensionally or one side of it. We need a mayor that's willing to actually speak to residents that are being the most impacted by political decisions at that table. We need someone who will show up to teardowns. We need someone who will talk about holding the police accountable. We will need someone to actually understand misogyny, right? And the ways in which their statements and their rhetoric continues to harm their residents. We need people who make sure that they're not prioritizing corporate pockets and prioritizing people instead. And I don't see that with any of the candidates that have potentially been named thus far, or Fred, or if Fred were to name somebody to run, I'm not interested. We need an entire new slate for this to be salvageable.
Well, you made some excellent points. I see there can be a strong mayor system where the mayor lines up votes, does a lot of backroom lobbying. We've had mayors like that in the past, right? Where they knew the vote before they walked into the council chamber and they were very proactive. You might not have liked their vision, but they were getting stuff done. Fred is not that guy. But also, to your point, I don't think that the ceremonial stuff is, and I'm not saying you're suggesting this, Sarah, but people sometimes think ceremonial and they think, oh, it's just window dressing. It's incredibly important how a mayor speaks to his city and for his city and about his city. It's incredibly important when there is a violent attack against the LGBTQ that the mayor comes right out and is absolutely in defense of that community and, you know, no tolerance for any of that kind of crap in his town. It's incredibly important when white supremacists are on the front porch of City Hall that the mayor be the first one out there with placards or to talk to them and say, you know, there's no room for you in our city if you're going to hate on other people in our city. It's incredibly important for the mayor to acknowledge Statistics Canada saying that we are the city with the most reported hate crimes, right? It's incredibly important that the mayor use their ceremonial voice, their bully pulpit, to build up their community, to support their community members. And I don't think we have seen that. And I think it's been a disgrace. And I don't think running for mayor out of ego or running for mayor out of stubbornness, Mark, are reasons enough to do it. So what do you think we need in that mayor's chair? And then we're going to go around the council and talk about who's running in all the races, the rumors we may have heard.
I think we need somebody who is not afraid to lose. I think that is not afraid to lose the next election. And I think that is, you know, I think that's the most important thing in politics, to be honest with you. We have too many people who get elected and then the process starts right away for the next campaign. How am I going to get reelected? And we don't get those true, you know, disruptors, those people who come in who want to challenge the system, shake the status quo, break it down and say, if I lose, I lose, right? And I think that's the kind of leadership that will inspire more people to get involved in politics, in at the local level, and the ward levels, and you know, they want to see that. Instead, it just becomes this perpetual cycle of the same old club, and you don't know, and it's, you know, you don't know anything, and blah, 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 blah. We need people who, you know, we have so many crises facing us. You know, the pandemic we're just coming out of. We've got a climate crisis that people are just walking into, and we don't see any leadership on how we're going to deal with this. This is the climate crisis is going to make the pandemic look like a walk in the park. And so I'm looking for leaders who are going to be, you know, inspirational about what we need to do and not worry about losing the next election. Let the chips fall where they may, but change the system.
Well, damn, I've heard more passion and vision from both of you than I've heard from the mayors that we've been talking about, right? Where is that for Hamilton? I can't even remember the last time that I saw Mayor Eisenberger or Mayor Bertina inspire me like that or address some of the issues head on. So since you're not running, Mark, and Sarah, you're still floating the idea, let's move past the mayor's race, because Mark, when you started talking about leadership that didn't get in it to win the next election afterwards, that put their principles right out there, I think of Ward 1's current councillor, Maureen Wilson. And I think for the ward she's in, she's highly respected for that principled approach. And she's been under a lot of attack around that council horseshoe for speaking up and for having her voice. Do either one of you hear any rumors of anyone trying to challenge her incumbency in Ward 1, or does Maureen pretty much have a lock on it?
I would suggest that any progressive thinking about running against Maureen reconsider. She's a strong, serious candidate. We need her voice at the council table. Sure, there will probably be some from the other side who will challenge her, but I don't think anybody, honestly, I think they'd be wasting their money. Maureen's a lock to win again. And I would just, nobody likes to have somebody claimed, right? But right. At the end of the day, I think she deserves, another term, and she's shown exactly the type of things I was saying we need in a mayor. She's willing to take the controversial stands and let the chips fall where they may, and we need more of that.
Well, she had her house egged in the middle of the night with her children sleeping. I mean, what kind of crap is that in a democracy? It shows that she's making a difference and upsetting some people, right? She's putting herself out there, although she doesn't deserve that treatment. Sarah, your thoughts on Ward 1 before we jump to Ward 2?
Yeah, I think it's a waste of time to challenge people who have been doing good work. I think there are specific seats that will be easier to flip, that people should focus their energy on. When
I said off the top, you're an organizer extraordinaire, I mean it. You actually focus on where the wins can be, right? And I think that that's critical, because one of the things that drives me nuts about Hamilton is that you either hear there's nothing we can do about it, or throw all the bums out, right? That's not strategic. There's always something we can do about it, and not everybody should go. There are some people who are doing a good job. Mark, let's talk Ward 2. It's a big, big ward in the city. What do you think is going to happen there? What are you hearing?
It's obvious that Cameron's preparing for another run, and I hope he does, because I think he's a great, strong candidate, represents the things that we're looking for: diversity and a different opinion. And I don't know, I'm not inspired by Jason. I've nothing against the guy, but he just doesn't, it seems like he just wants to be in the old boys club, and he's comfortable there. And, I get worried about people who land in these gigs and then it becomes their profession. Right. And there's no other options but to keep running, because this is my job. And then, come election time, they'll outspend any of the, newer candidates, because everything's on the line for them. Right. If they don't get this, they're out of a job. And that concerns me. And I'd like to see, I think Ward 2, the whole lower city is going to be the heartbeat of how we progress as a city in total, right? It's going to be the area where much of the development, intensification, and density is going to happen, the LRT line, all the good things that are really going to spur this ripple wave of economic and socioeconomic impacts in Hamilton will come out of the heart of our city. And so we need these, I'd like to see some people with bolder visions, not people who are, throwing people out of encampments, right?
Yeah, I'm completely anti-Jason Farr. He doesn't even live in Ward 2. I don't even understand why he continues to run when he never shows up for his residents and constituents, and he consistently prioritizes developers. Yeah, I'm definitely supporting Cameron in the next election.
And that's it's a big money ward. It is the downtown core. And to your point earlier, Sarah, I think a lot about Ward 2, because not only is there a lot of potential development dollars, but you got the LRT going through, you have the affordable housing crisis. We want a councillor there who excuse me, has really got a sense of how to do a great job for that ward. And talk about money, Mark. I mean, the councillors decided, I think Chad Collins came up with this brilliant plan to give them all $2 million to spend in the year before the election, right? Out of the gas tax. Having $2 million to dump on supposed to be, you know, transit projects, but that's going to be hard for anyone to run against that kind of cash. And every incumbent does it at all levels. That's the time of the big budget announcements. But what kind of a disadvantage does that give to people? Now, Cameron Crutch that we're talking about, he got about 33% of the vote, I think, or 31% when he ran against Jason last time. Okay, let's go to Ward 3. Who do you have on the ticket for Ward 3 a year out, Mark?
Narinder, again, strong candidate, deserves to be reelected. I don't think anybody progressive should not challenge her. I want to see her reelected.
Yeah, I think that's a given. Again, I think we should leave people alone who are at least challenging power around those tables. Yeah. And I think Maureen and Narinder have both been doing that to the best of their ability. It's not easy in there. And I think it would be a waste of time and money to challenge either of them.
So Sarah, let me start with you on Ward 4, because if Councillor Marilla goes by what he's been saying, he's not going to run again. He wants to retire. That opens up the seat. Now, there are rumors maybe one of his daughters would go for the seat. What are you hearing in that ward in terms of candidates who are ready to go for it?
Well, this is awkward because I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking about it. Yeah, there are some good candidates that I'm hearing their names floating around. I don't know if they've said it on TV, so I'm not going to say anything.
Well, I can tell you one good candidate I know is not ready for us to talk about it just yet.
Oh. Okay. Sorry, I don't know. Yeah, she's cool. Whatever. Yeah, yeah.
So there are people who are definitely gunning for the seat. Mark, did you want to weigh in on Ward 4?
I think you know, if Marilla doesn't run, hopefully, and you know, God, please don't run. You know, I think, and maybe I'm just inspiring him to run again, but I hope that I think that could be a really competitive race, and it could be a showcase for new ideas. I think that, you know, this could be a ward where we see real competitive ideas come out, and with new candidates that aren't sort of like the old guard, and we can really see a discussion about some of the, you know, it could be the sort of like really exciting race of this one, you know, both this one and Ward 5. I think that, you know, some good ideas could come out of both of those because they're both all new candidates.
I said off the top of Ward 4, if Sam follows through on his retirement plans. Sarah, what do you think the likelihood is that he might just decide it's a pretty good gig if you can keep it?
Sam Marula he has a history of going back and forth on his opinions quite a bit, depending on how he's feeling. So I wouldn't put it past him to run again. However, if he doesn't, then I think a progressive has a very good shot at winning in Ward 4, and people should pay attention.
I talked to a former politician from both the local and upper levels of government today, and they were saying they think this will be a really big change election. Like we could see 7 seats flipped. So Mark, let's get to Ward 5. What are you seeing there? There's
lots of opportunities. I'm assuming that Chad has groomed somebody to sort of like, you know, be his fill-in. I don't know who that is. I was surprised that he ran as a Liberal to be in general, because I never really found him to be of my former party that I was involved with. I just never found him to share the same kind of views as me. But so I'm assuming that he, you know, these guys always do this. They groom somebody to run in their place because their ego can't let them let go of, you know, their kingdom, their fiefdom, whatever you want to call it, right? So let's hope. I haven't heard anything out of that ward. I'm assuming that, you know, I can only assume that, you know, the NDP, you know, which tend to sort of, you know, put forward and encourage new candidates to come forward, we'll have somebody lined up to run there, and we'll probably find out pretty soon, and it'll be pretty obvious. I've been talking to some people who
are considering going for the appointment, but want to make sure that doesn't preclude them for going for the real chair after, right? So they don't want that kind of appointment exercise to be something that kind of traps them in, and then they don't actually get on council and do the work that they want to do. So as Coach Joe Damptey said on our show last week, he hopes that everyone in Hamilton runs for that appointment. They probably won't get it because, as you mentioned, Mark, there might already be somebody they have their eyes on. But boy, they get 5 minutes to talk to council and to lay out what they would do differently, or maybe hold council to account for its own performance. So I think it would be a heck of a show. So I'm going to echo Kojo's call to action on that one. It would be certainly entertaining to watch, that's for sure. Okay, let's jump forward to Ward 6. Ward 7.
There are definitely progressives thinking about running, I think, in wards 6 and 7. So I'm excited to see that. I also think that there are people planning to run for trustee. And I know we don't pay attention to trustees as much, but regardless, I think the conversation around 2022 is going to be different because of that.
Let's talk about that, Sarah, because as I mentioned, I mean, you're the organizer among us. Is trustee a pipeline to getting on actual council?
I don't see it as a pipeline, more as a way to test power. What would it look like? It's hard to get a whole slew of people elected onto council at once. Trustees a lot easier. So what does it look like to actually run enough trustees to control a table? And then what forms of repression come down when you do control a table, right? Because everyone says that's the way to change things is to get people in. Okay, well, what happens when you get enough people in? So for me, it's a way to test the theory, right? Do staff get involved? Do unions get involved? Like, what sort of ways does the system itself try to hold on to its power when you have enough people in those seats? And so the trustee race, although it might not have the same weight as council, would be one to watch.
That's a brilliant observation, because Mark alluded to it earlier. Sometimes people get on council with the intention of never becoming part of the system. And I have literally on election night asked several councillors who were friends of mine at the time, what's going to keep you from becoming part of the system and being the very old club that we can't stand? And then you see them become part of the system and you think, what happened? Where is the point? Where is it horse trading in the back rooms? Is it fear of losing re-election? Is it fear of being undermined publicly by some of these powerful councillors? You know, what keeps even if you get them in there, how do you keep the system, Mark, if we can just go on a little rabbit hole here, how do you keep the system from taking the candidate and making it more of the same that we don't want?
You know, this is a great point, Laura, because, you know, as someone who served inside government, you know, my eyes were sort of opened about how you get ground down. You know, you go inside and with the bureaucracy, and this is one thing I will say, I mean, no offense to the hardworking people at City of Hamilton, but we need a culture change at the City of Hamilton bureaucracy too. And because they really, you know, I always describe bureaucrats as the Borg because they live forever, right? And politicians come and go, we die, but the Borg lives forever and they know it, right? And I saw this when I was in government. You know, you come forward with good ideas and you're really passionate about them. You think they'll make a change, and the lawyers and the bureaucrats and in the legal, you know, the bureaucratic lawyers, they try to find a way to sort of bring you back, right? And no, that's not the way we do things, you know. And I really, you know, this is what I think we all levels of politics suffers from. This is that sort of, you know, you get in with idealism, you get in with passion, you think you're going to change the system, and then you just get hammered down because they want you to conform, right? They want you to know they're really in charge. They're making the rules. We know how the city works, blah, 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 blah. And I think we need to challenge that system. And this is why I want, you know, like when you talk about Sewergate, when you talk about these other things, and I think to myself, the lawyers, it was the lawyers. The lawyers would have been talking to these councillors and saying, you shut your mouth. Don't you say anything or it's going to cost us $1 billion in lawsuits, right? And you get worn down by that sort of, you feel like you're just a cog in the machine. And I think we need people to challenge that.
So Mark, what you just said there pisses me off so much. And I ranted about this last week on the OShow, and I got a ton of feedback across all platforms of people who said, hell yeah. The idea that lawyers are taking these leaders, in air quotes, that we brought onto council with the best intentions and that the lawyers are in fact creating policy and creating political votes, if you will, decisions based on their, concerns or their warnings or whatever. If I wanted a lawyer, I would just go out and elect a lawyer. I'm trying to elect a candidate who has vision and has principles and has experience organizing in the community and gives a shit. Not someone who's going to go by technical legal advice to protect them, which never really works anyway, because we still spilled 24 billion liters of raw sewage. We're still going to pay for it, Hamilton. Who cares what the lawyers had to say? So it frustrates me to no end, Sarah. So Sarah, could you please take this from me? Is legal advice a defense against becoming part of the system, or how do they prevent themselves from becoming just spokespeople for the legal advice from the city lawyers, not even their own lawyers?
At this point, I'm always interested in supporting people who understand fundamentally that the system is not broken, it was built this way. And so that means if you're going to put your hat in the ring and invest your time in being elected versus being in community on the ground, then you're making the decision to enter a system that is broken, and you should adjust yourself according to that. Understand that the ethics of the system, the ethics that the lawyers will put on you, are not your ethics from community. You can have a different set of ethics. And that means sometimes opening your mouth when they tell you to not, because it's important. That means sometimes speaking at the table or missing meetings to be out on the ground in community when they're calling you to do that, right? You do not need to follow the ethics that are ascribed to you in that system, because the system was built to be broken. And if you don't understand that by the time you get in, then you shouldn't have been supported to begin with.
So tell me, Sarah and Mark, do you think this is a good litmus test question at the doors? Presuming that people running for council and challenging the incumbent mayor, if he runs again, are going to mount a ground game, because I know, Mark, you're passionate to speak about the need for that, and I'll get right to you on that question. But do you think a question at the door, if they come around and do the ground game work, should be, Sarah, what would you have done about Sewergate? If you got on council and found out that there was a legal advice to conceal from Hamiltonians the depth and breadth of a mixed sewage leak that could affect their health and the health of their animals potentially, like what would you have done in that room and subsequently? Do you think that that's a fair question?
Definitely, because I'm tired of elected people talking about risk to them when they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars or however much they make, while people on the ground are facing the real risk of, poisoned waters or policing or homelessness or all these crises going on. That is the real risk. The risk is not to your reputation or even legally, right? If you're going into that, you should understand that whether it's Sewergate or around policing, you have a certain level of accountability to community. And if you're being put in there, is to share as much as you can back, or to communicate the boundaries of what you're not allowed to share and why. So if you're bound by the law, say, I cannot speak to this because I'm bound by the law. But there's nothing like preventing you from saying that. Because at a certain point, you have to draw that line between and figure out what the line is between what you're willing to do and what you're not allowed to do. I don't see that line being clearly drawn between progressives before they get into power. And then they get into power and then they're floundering to figure out that line. No, figure it out before you run. And that should be a question on the doors.
Love that answer. And can we talk, Mark, about the ground game? Because as we talked about, the writ is dropping late this time. It's dropping in May, which means you can't really organize publicly or raise funds until May. It used to be January. So now a whole bunch of people are going to be fighting the dual headwinds of council incumbents dropping millions into their wards, and the fact that the council incumbents have tons and tons more leadway in terms of name recognition and promoting their vision or their value proposition. So what kind of ground game do people who are watching and listening to the OShow right now need to learn from you as a political organizer in your past, Mark?
Well, I'd say that I think when a campaign starts, people focus too much on the expensive stuff, the lit, the cards, the social media, the advertising, the signs. While those are all good for name recognition, in a local municipal election, the key to winning is to knock on doors, to collect data, and then to implement a ground game on election day to go back and pull every one of those votes. And I've seen this over and over again where people, they get so wrapped up in, oh, I'm running a campaign. This is cool. Like, oh, I got to see my signs. I got to get some advertising out. People only care really in the last couple of weeks of a campaign. It's when the rubber hits the road, it's when they're really paying attention and they're going to make their decision. So you've got advanced polls and you've got voting day, and you need a crew. You need to spend most of your budget on, or whatever resources you have, on pulling your vote, because these guys win, the incumbents win with their 3,000 threshold every time. They get the same 3,000 people out every time. So if you are going to beat them, you need to get 3,001 out, and you need to pull that vote. You need to drag them out of their houses. Not, I shouldn't say that, but like encourage them very, passionately to go down and vote. Because look at how many wards in 2018 actually had more than 40% voter turnout. I think there were 5 or 4. That's it. Everyone else was 30. There's a lot of votes on the table. 70% of the votes are on the table for an incumbent. So that's my recommendation. I worked with a candidate last municipal election who was a friend of mine. It wasn't a political thing. And he spent a ton of money on signs and literature. And yet when the election day came, I was like, where's your ground game? Didn't have one.
Sarah, do you agree with that advice?
Definitely. I think that's what the NDP is really good at, having a really strong ED and pulling out votes. But I would say for people wanting to run for council, you have to also build an alternative. So why are you running, and how is that different than the incumbent? Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of people have never had their doors knocked still, and we're in 2021. So on top of building out a strong ground game, how are you also identifying the people that have not yet been engaged, which is what Mark is getting at? And how are you building an alternative? So people are jaded and we're in a pandemic. What is it that they need to hear to be able to trust you? And what is it that you are going to do differently to deserve that vote to begin with? And until you can answer those key questions, it's not even worth it to try to run.
Wow. I don't disagree. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking empathy would be a start. Candidates who actually go to the door, care to listen, give a crap about what people are facing in this city. Sometimes I feel as though our council really has lost touch. They haven't had to do that for so long, many of them, that they only hear from their friends or the people who constantly support their campaigns every cycle. And they're not hearing the rest of the voices. And the fact that you said 70% of votes are on the table, Mark, I mean, what an opportunity for change if we can get those votes out. So let me ask you this in the few minutes we have remaining. Of course, both of you are far more fascinating than just going around the horseshoe looking at the races, and I've loved our discussion. So, but to finish this off, because I know some people are looking forward to hearing from both of you about each of the races, Sarah, are there races that you see being open to flip? And let's spend our remaining time just addressing those. Which of the races that we haven't discussed yet look like there's a potential for a run at the incumbent?
2, 14, 7.
I love that you had an answer ready to go.
Those are the ones. That's what I'm excited about. I think that's where I'm putting my energy. Yeah.
Tell us about 14.
You're really putting me in a hot spot. I don't want to say anything I'm not supposed to, but I know that the current councillor has been having a lot of difficulty in his personal life. He's been away from council for quite a while. And so if he chooses not to run again, I think it opens the doors for some other folks to put their hat in the ring.
Yeah, and you're talking about Terry Whitehead, who is on a mental health leave that just got extended, and he'll be coming back 2 days a week, I think, in mid-October. But Mark, what about Judy Partridge? Mm-hmm. I mean, she only won by a couple hundred votes. Isn't Waterdown potentially one that's up for grabs? And Esther Pauls, I'm hearing rumors she may not go for it again. Could that be another race that could be taken?
That's true. Those are also options, but I think from where I'm looking at it, it's better to focus energy on not everything. I think folks who live up there, yeah, they should, but I really don't know anyone in Waterdown. So folks up there should be organizing their communities. It's just hard to, especially if there are mayoral candidates that are good, I'm not sure. Like, it's hard to figure out where to put your energy as progressives on the ground between all these campaigns, right? And so focus where you think you could actually win, and where you have a base to begin with. Don't go into it empty-handed.
Well, let me ask you this just as a wrap-up question, because I do think that I take your point that the council seats are the places where you can really flip things and really make a change, right? And there's a lot of opportunity, and people should be organizing soon, and don't get all caught up in the big posters, get caught up in the ground game and talking to people and being ready to pull out the vote. I take all of your wisdom. I've never run a campaign. I trust both of you tremendously on this. When it comes to the mayor's race, at least the last two mayor's races were decided on the LRT. And if you were progressive and wanted higher order transit and wanted some of the benefits of LRT, you really didn't have much of a choice. It was stop the train or get the investment in the city. Or it was, the guy who was for the train, the guy who was for the buses, or the guy who said, I'll ride the fence and let the citizens decide. Those were the last two mayoral ballot questions. So let me just ask you both this, because I know there are serious people looking at running for mayor and they're thinking hard about it right now. What should be the ballot question for the mayor on October 24th, 2022 that Hamiltonians should be making their decision on? And God help us, it's not bifurcated between two recycled mayors. I'll start with you, Mark, and I'll end with you, Sarah.
Coming out of the pandemic, I think this is an opportunity to I don't want to use the word reset, because I know the conservatives get all, the big reset. I'm talking about resetting our priorities for moving forward. And I think that comes down to, climate change. I think that comes down to poverty, housing, the LRT, the investments we're going to make in our community to create a better place for my daughter. So she's 11, I think to myself, when she's, by 2040, what's Hamilton going to look like? Is it going to look exactly the same as it does today, with the same old retreads coming out and, just keeping the status quo? Or are we going to make a shift? Are we going to stand up to things like expanding the urban boundary? These things, are we going to really shift our focus on creating a new climate-friendly, people-friendly community that's vibrant, full of economic opportunity? And I think the pandemic is going to change the way our economy works. And I think there's a huge opportunity for someone to come out basically with, it's time for change. And I know that's old retread. I know it's been used, but it really is time for big change. And I know it's risky because, Hamilton, all the different wards, you're going to have people going, I don't like change. I don't like change. But, we really need someone to be bold about that and, and talk about the looming crises that are facing us. I'm not trying to overstate it. I work in climate change every day, and I'm telling you, it's going to make the pandemic look like a cakewalk.
And you know what? I'm so glad you brought that up. And it is our most vulnerable, right? Who are most subjected to climate change. I mean, I think these issues, they tie together. We have to see climate change as part of these other issues. Next week on the OShow, I'm actually going to have Dawn from Catch and Linda from Environment Hamilton to talk about the Stop the Sprawl, because we need to just focus on that and all its implications. But Sarah, let me put that final question again to you. What should be the ballot question for Hamiltonians, assuming LRT is not how we decide a mayor this time around? What should we decide a mayor on?
Yeah, the last election, I didn't support Fred. I never have, but I was still very disappointed by Fred in this cycle. And I think that goes to show that, we have to move beyond single issue kind of votes in these cycles, because that's the way that we get bamboozled. I do hope that in the next cycle, housing is a priority. And we focus on working class issues, right? Hamilton is a working class city. It always has been. And we need to start prioritizing the people who've been left behind in this pandemic. Workers, but also people on social assistance, also people living out in tents, people who are just struggling to get by, who are not making $100,000 a year or more, who are just struggling to get by. So housing, working class issues, and then I also agree on the climate point, but it can't be a one issue election. We can't keep letting that happen.
I think I agree with both of you, and I like to vote on character, because issues are always going to come up and surprises like the pandemic are going to come up. But if you have someone of good character with strong ethics who listens and learns on the job and is open to best practice and empathy, we can have a much, much better leadership and I think a better council going forward. So I want to thank you both. I wish you were both on council, but I will appreciate your voices wherever you choose to have them going forward. But thank you for being the voices that people trust on the issues they care about and joining the OShow. Sarah Jama, Mark Cripps, I hope to have you back again soon. Thank you so much.